Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you to our first Global Leaders Forum of this year. I'm Jonathan Haskett. I'm the new Associate Director of the Energy, Environment, and Resources. Energy, Resources, and Environment, excuse me. Dr. David Gerard is feeling a little under the weather and will not be able to attend today, and he sends his apologies. Today it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Howard Gruenspecht of the Energy Information Administration. Over the past 30 years, Dr. Gruenspecht has worked extensively on electricity policy issues, including restructuring and reliability, regulations affecting motor fuels and vehicles, energy-related environmental issues, and economy-wide energy modeling. Before joining EIA, he was a resident scholar at Resources for the Future. Dr. Gruenspecht has served as the Director of Economic, Electricity, and Natural Gas Analysis in the Department of Energy's Office of Policy, and his accomplishments include, as a career senior executive at DOE, having been recognized with 3 presidential rank awards. Prior to his service at DOE, Dr. Gruenspecht was senior staff economist at the Council of Economic Advisors, with primary responsibilities in the areas of environment, energy, regulation, and international trade. His other professional experience includes service as a faculty member at the Graduate School of Industrial Administration, Carnegie Mellon University, economic advisor to the chairman of the U.S. Trade Commission, International Trade Commission, and assistant director, economics and business on the White House domestic policy staff. Dr. Gruenspecht received his BA from McGill and holds a PhD in economics from Yale University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gruenspecht.
Well, I guess you've all made it through what Washington calls a snowstorm. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Jonathan, for the kind introduction. The School of Advanced International Studies has a long interest in energy and has trained many very talented professionals who work in energy throughout the government, including several at the Energy Information Administration. It's a pleasure to be here to continue the exchange of ideas between EIA and SAIS. I'm here to present an early look at EIA's latest reference case projections developed for the 2012 Annual Energy Outlook. The complete version of the Outlook, which will be released in the spring, includes many alternative cases in recognition of the uncertainty inherent in making projections about energy markets. A retrospective review of earlier EIA long-run projections suggests that the average difference between the reference case projections and the averaged realized outcomes is less than 6% for most consumption and production flows, but much larger for prices. That uncertainty should certainly be kept in mind when considering the reference case projections. A very wise person once noted that prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. Although it sounds something like Yogi Berra might have said, the observation was actually made by the eminent physicist Niels Bohr, and he was certainly right. Last but not least, before we start digging into the details and start our dialogue regarding the devils you will find there, it's important to recognize the staff of EIA's Office of Energy Analysis. As the current Secretary of State Hillary Clinton once wrote, it takes a village. And when it comes to the Annual Energy Outlook, that is certainly the case. There are really too many names to mention them all here, but I'd like to specifically recognize John Conti, EIA's Assistant Administrator for Energy Analysis, and Paul Holtberg, who has for many years ably led the effort of integrating the many pieces that go into this into a coherent outlook, which I can assure you is no small task. John and Paul, will you please stand and be recognized? So with that, let's get started. So, if you wanted to walk out in 5 minutes, I want to tell you what I think you need to know about this. The growth of energy use in our reference case slows over the projection period, reflecting an extended economic recovery and increasing energy efficiency in end-use applications. Domestic crude oil production increased from 5.1 million barrels per day in 2007 to 5.5 million barrels per day in 2010. That's really reversing a long slide that I'm sure you're aware of. Over the next 10 years, continued development of tight oil combined with the development of offshore Gulf of Mexico resources are projected to push domestic crude oil production to 6.7 million barrels per day in 2020, a level not seen since 1994. U.S. dependence on imported petroleum as a share of total liquid fuels consumption, which peaked at around, well, peaked is never, could go back again, but was about 60% in 2005, 2006, was 49% in 2010, and in our projection it drops to 36% in 2035. This outcome reflects increased vehicle efficiency, growth in domestic crude production of over 1 million barrels per day by 2020, an increase in biofuels use by over 1 million barrels per day of crude oil equivalent by the middle of the next decade, and modest economic and demographic drivers of demand. Note that this occurs in a reference case that does not include recently proposed fuel economy standards for model years 2017 to 2025 light-duty vehicles, which, if included, would significantly reduce projected liquid fuels consumption and petroleum imports in the 2025 to 2035 period. Natural gas production is expected to exceed consumption by early in the next decade. This outlook reflects the increased use of liquefied natural gas in markets outside of North America, strong domestic natural gas production, reduced pipeline imports and increased pipeline exports, and relatively low natural gas prices in the United States compared to other global markets. The natural gas share of electric power generation increases from 24% in 2010 to 27% in 2035, and the renewable share grows from 10% to 16% over the same period. The projected coal share of overall electricity generation falls to 39% in 2035, still the biggest single source of electricity, but well below the 48 to 50% share of coal seen as recently as 2007. This reflects slow growth in electricity demand, continued competition from natural gas and renewables, and the need to comply with new environmental regulations. Finally, energy-related carbon dioxide emissions, which have in recent years remained below the pre-recession peak level in the middle of the past decade, grow very slowly in the reference case. They are more than 7% below their 2005 level in 2020 and do not return to their 2005 level by the end of the projection period. So those are sort of the, you can all leave now. The rest is. But as many of you know, EIA's reference case is different than many private projections in that EIA does not attempt to include a forecast of policy changes that will affect future energy decisions, prices, and quantities. That's not because we expect there won't be any policy changes over the next 25 years. Certainly will be. but this approach allows for the use of our projections as a baseline for evaluating the impact of policy proposals and alternative assumptions. And again, when we come out with a complete annual energy outlook, there'll be a lot of different scenarios. The prevailing assumption of the reference case, however, is that current laws and regulations continue as written, and likewise, assumptions about technology reflect expectations of trend progress rather than revolutionary breakthroughs. So, nothing to say on that one. So this is just a point of reference. Here is what the U.S. energy mix looked like as of 2010. Petroleum, natural gas, and coal are the dominant sources of primary energy. More than 2/3 of our primary energy is used to generate electricity or as a fuel for transportation. So here is an overview of our past and projected energy mix. The information for 1980 to 2010 on the left side of the graphic is historical data. The information to the right of the 2010 line reflects the reference case that I'm here to talk about today. The figure also provides the shares of total energy use for each source in both 2010, the last year of historical data, and 2035, the last year of the projection. So, first observation, total U.S. primary energy consumption rises by about 10% over the projection period relative to 2010 levels. It takes until 2022 for primary energy consumption to get back to its 2007 level. Including the proposed fuel economy standards for model years 2017 to 2025 would reduce the 2035 projected primary energy use by roughly 3%. So that gives you an idea. Renewables meet a large share of increased demand for energy, growing from over 8% in 2010 to almost 15% in 2035. Increased use of non-hydro renewable energy in the electric power sector powers about 1/3 of the growth in electricity generation from 2010 to 2035. State requirements for renewable electricity generation and the federal renewable fuel standard are key policy drivers. The fossil fuel share of total energy consumption declines from its 2010 level of 83%, but it's still 77% in 2035 in the reference case, which does not assume policy changes. Total U.S. consumption of liquid fuels, primarily for transportation, grows very slowly by only 3%, slower than the overall rate of energy growth. And keeping in mind that liquid fuels includes both biofuels and fossil-based fuels, fossil-based liquid fuels use declines by about 5%. And again, this is without the new fuel economy standards. Coal consumption grows over the last 2 decades of the projection period, but remains below its 2007 level through 2035. Natural gas production, consumption, I should say, focusing on consumption in this, what the U.S. uses, rises about 10% over the projection period, primarily due to increased use in electric power generation. Nuclear generation grows by about 11%, but its share in total, there it is. I guess its share here in total energy remains roughly constant. So, the economy's energy intensity, carbon intensity, and per capita energy use are all projected to decline even without new policies. Energy intensity, measured as 1,000 BTU of primary energy use per dollar of GDP, declines by 42% from 2010 to 2035. CO2 emissions per dollar of GDP declines by over 50% from 2005 to 2035, an annual rate of 2.3% per year. So we're using less energy per unit of economic output, and the energy we're using is becoming less carbon intensive. So carbon emissions per dollar of GDP fall by more than energy use per dollar of GDP. Finally, the U.S. population increases by 25% over the projection period in the reference case, while energy consumption increases by only 10%. So energy consumption per capita declines by about 0.5% per year. For a long time, if you look at that green line, energy consumption per capita in the United States was relatively flat. It started dropping a little bit post-2005, and we expect that decline to continue. So this is U.S. energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. You can see from the historical side that they fell by about 3% in 2008. They fell by 7% in 2009 as the bottom fell out of the economy. They increased by almost 4% in 2010 as the economy came out of the recession. In the latest projections, they rise, but they don't return to their 2005 level by the end of the projection period in 2035. Electricity and transportation contribute to the updated projection for energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. Electricity-related emissions are tempered by slow electricity demand growth and a shift in the generation mix toward fuels and technologies with lower carbon intensity, renewables and natural gas. Electricity demand growth reflects an extended economic recovery as well as more stringent appliance standards and building codes. The generation mix reflects state renewable portfolio standard requirements, trends in coal and natural gas prices, and environmental regulations affecting existing generation. Vehicle efficiency improvements, increased use of biofuels, and higher fuel prices moderate the use of fossil-based transportation fuels, which I've already mentioned decline in absolute terms between 2010 and 2035. There you go. Okay, this figure shows the growth in estimated natural gas resources over additions of the annual energy outlook going back to the year 2000. Proved reserves of all types are shown at the bottom of the bars in the blue, while the red at the top reflects estimated unproven shale resources, and the green in the middle, estimated unproven resources of all other types. So first I would note that despite, starting with the blue at the bottom, I note that despite cumulative production since 2000 in excess of 230 trillion cubic feet, both proven reserves, the blue, and total resources, the whole bar, have generally been increasing. However, the estimate of unproven shale gas resources used in the latest outlook are lower than those used in last year's version as a result of new information from the U.S. Geological Survey and other additional data that has become available. The biggest single change in the red bars is the reduction in the Marcellus resource assessment. Our latest projections use an estimate of 141 trillion cubic feet, well below last year's resource estimate. The new Marcellus estimate is above the mean estimate of 84 trillion cubic feet published by the USGS in the summer of 2011, but falls within the 90% confidence band associated with that estimate. The shale resource estimate used in our outlook, while above the USGS mean estimate, is well below many other published estimates. Resource assessments are clearly highly uncertain. Everything's uncertain, but resource assessments really, really uncertain. And I'm sure that EIA and others will be working to improve their estimates as new information about geology and well productivity becomes available over time. I would also note that I know that changes in or differences among resource estimates receive a great deal of attention, and I'm sure this will receive some attention. But resource estimates are not the only driver or even the most important driver of natural gas production and price projections for the next 25 years. As we will shortly discuss, the new reference case price projection is actually slightly below that in last year's outlook, and the production projection is somewhat higher. The continued observed increase in shale gas well productivity and continued trends in declining drilling costs are important factors that drive our projections for the natural gas market. So this figure shows reference case projections for consumption, domestic supply, and net imports of natural gas. And domestic natural gas consumption, again, as I mentioned earlier, grows by almost 10% between 2010 and 2035. And that's really driven by U.S. economic growth and competition with other fuels. Prices do matter for the choice of fuels. In contrast, the growth in natural gas production is largely determined by natural gas prices and the cost of developing resources. Current low natural gas prices, and last week February gas was trading in the $2.50 per million BTU range, really a price not seen for a decade or more, are not yet reducing production because of a variety of short-term market dynamics and some factors that also have an effect in the longer term. Again, the long-term factors include the current industry's capability to efficiently develop resources, the success of technology to quickly produce shale gas resources, and the higher prices of crude oil and natural gas liquids that incentivize the development of wet shale gas plays where crude oil and natural gas liquids that have a high market value are available, and they can greatly increase the economic return to drillers. So if you look at the top, with supply growing faster than consumption over the next decade, natural gas production exceeds domestic consumption early in the next decade, with the projection surplus being exported primarily to Mexico and overseas. And you can see the net imports line at the bottom of the graphic sometime after 2020 drops into negative territory. So I guess you could call that the U.S. becoming a net exporter. So this figure, which I think is self-explanatory, provides a breakdown of the sort of different sources of natural gas. Is this one I have here? Oh, wrong one here. I got it right. Okay. This figure summarizes the historical and projected composition of U.S. natural gas production. So cumulative natural gas production, again, is cumulative. Is 7% higher than in last year's outlook. You don't see last year's outlook, so it's hard to see that. Shale gas production continues to be the major contributor to increased production. As you see, we have the same kind of style, so it grows from 23% of production in 2010 to 49% in 2035. Most of the growth, again, in shale gas comes from continued drilling in plays with high concentrations of liquids. Production levels for tight gas and coal bed methane also increase in absolute terms, even though their share of total production declines. And as in last year's reference case, the Alaska natural gas pipeline is not constructed. Prices for natural gas that we envision are just too low to make that economic. So this one is sort of looks at various historical and projected years and addresses how natural gas is used in 2005, 2010, and then these 3 projected years. Most of the natural gas demand growth is in the electric power sector. There's also growth in industrial demand, especially in the first decade of the projection period, and some growth in commercial demand. So given the variety of factors previously discussed, projected natural gas prices are somewhat lower in the near term given to those in last year's edition of the Outlook. And so I guess we all know natural gas prices are really quite low now. We know that to be standing here in the middle of January and have working gas in storage of about 3.3 trillion cubic feet is just sort of an amazing situation. Some of that reflects the weather, but some of it definitely reflects the production of natural gas. Again, some of the factors that are influencing the short term and the long term, shale gas, well production improvements, well drilling and completion costs have declined, primarily due to both the drilling of multiple wells from a single pad and the decline in the amount of time required to drill and complete individual wells. As the shale gas resource base is developed, however, production gradually shifts to those resources that are somewhat less productive and more expensive to produce. So over time, we do expect gas prices to rise, both in last year's projection and in this year's projection. And finally, the dramatic decline rates in shale gas wells from their initial production rates results in an increasing number of wells needing to be drilled in later years as shale becomes a larger part of total supply. Enough with the gas. So this figure summarizes oil price scenarios that we're going to look at in this year's annual energy outlook. Today, we're not going to discuss the high and the low, although we will when the complete outlook is released in the spring. So in the reference case, which is illustrated there in the middle, oil prices in real dollars continue to rise as the global demand grows and increases in supply continue to be constrained by both below the ground and above the ground factors. In 2035, the average real price of crude oil rises to about $145 per barrel in 2010 dollars, about $230 per barrel in nominal dollars. And the thinking underlying that scenario is that OPEC targets a relatively constant market share of total world liquids production. The rising average cost of developing new resources limits supply increases. And there's significant global demand growth, which is underpinned by the economic growth in emerging economies that certainly have significant room to grow in terms of satisfying transportation service demands. And transportation is where a lot of the liquid petroleum is used. So this figure provides some global context for the reference case view of the supply side of liquids, where prices that we pay in the U.S. are clearly set or driven by what happens in a worldwide marketplace. So again, we see global demand growing by about 25% over the next 25 years, and supply matches that, so supply grows by about 25% in the next 25 years. That's a slower rate than it grew over the last 20 years, and by the end of the projection, total world's liquid use is about 110 million barrels a day in 2035. That's not all petroleum. That includes liquid biofuels as well. It includes conventional and unconventional petroleum. It includes small amounts of gas to liquids and coal to liquids. OPEC share sort of increases, working from the top down, sort of OPEC share increases a little bit. We expect greater production from the Persian Gulf region, which includes Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran, to contribute to OPEC growth. Non-OPEC, non-OECD producers, that's a grouping a catch-all grouping really that includes Russia, Kazakhstan, and a whole host of other countries that were once part of the Soviet Union, as well as Brazil, China, and a host of small African producers. are expected to retain their 35% share of total liquid supply in 2035. So in absolute terms, they'd be growing. I think what's most interesting for this group is the green area in the figure, which represents OECD Americas. That's Canada, Mexico, the U.S. I think it also includes Chile, but they don't produce much liquids. So the United States and Canada are expected to increase their liquids production, and that would just about offset, in share terms, Mexico's decline, and OECD America as a whole would retain a 19% share of global total supply. And finally, the increase in OPEC's market share that we've already mentioned is mostly offset by a declining market share for the OECD other grouping at the bottom of the figure, which mainly includes European producers in the North Sea. So that we do expect their role at the bottom to fall off from a 6% share of supply to a 3% share of supply. So that's supply. This is now going back to just the U.S. This is our consumption. Again, consumption of liquid fuels, we expect it to grow by about 5% from 2010 to 2035. However, as you can see from this, the petroleum content of liquid fuels actually decreases. Well, it depends what you call petroleum. The oil content of liquid fuels actually decreases. And if you take the biofuels and the natural gas plant liquids, then you can see that the other stuff, which is net petroleum imports, petroleum production, and liquids from coal, actually is declining from 2010 to 2035. I guess net petroleum imports are expected to continue to decline, as I mentioned in the overview, from 49% of supply to 36% in 2035. And natural gas plant liquids continue to increase, and that's associated with the increase in tight oil and shale gas production. And supplies from biofuel production are expected to increase significantly. I mean, it's still a pretty small share of the whole picture, but they increase significantly at the top there, with most from doubling of ethanol use in gasoline, blends of E10 and E15, as well as E85, along with much larger volumes of biomass-based diesel as a result of the Renewable Fuel Standard. So this is the, I guess the oil jaws chart. I guess I'll describe it. Shows production and domestic supply. And again, reliance on imported petroleum we expect to decline dramatically over the next 20 years, although imports continue to meet a major part of total U.S. liquid demand. And really what's going on here reflects tighter fuel economy standards, but not the 2017 to 2025 standards. Increased use of biofuels, which are the vast majority of which are domestically produced, and rising energy prices really act together to moderate demand growth, while a combination of higher prices and mandates spur increased domestic production of oil and biofuels. So again, we have this sort of narrowing in the role of net petroleum imports. This figure summarizes the level and composition of liquid biofuels use in our latest outlook and the previous year's outlook it replaces. And the reason, usually I focus on round years, but in the middle here you have 2022. There's a reason for that. That's the year that the targets were set for in the legislation in 2007 that boosted the Renewable Fuel Standard. And we do see that biofuel volumes almost double by 2022, but they don't meet the Renewable Fuel Standard level target of 36 billion gallons, which leads us to expect that waivers and adjustments will be made as provided in the law. I don't know if I really understand how to make the pointer point. Ah, there you go. So that's the legislated RFS target of 36, and this is what we thought. I don't know, something dropped off of this. Oh, it says, so the first bar is last year's projection. This bar is this year's projection. So we'll come down a little bit from last year to what we think could actually be achieved. And you'll notice that the biggest drop is in the green here, which is cellulosic ethanol. Financial and technological hurdles have delayed the start of many planned advanced biofuels projects. A number of plants have been delayed since the previous outlook was developed, leading us to lower volumes of advanced biofuels in the new outlook. This is like a continuing thing that's going on as the requirement for advanced biofuels gets phased in. EPA has had to waive the cellulosic ethanol targets already, and we expect that will be a continuing issue in the years ahead. So this is fuel economy standards or fuel economy of vehicles, certainly important moderators of projected demand growth for liquid fuels. Again, our reference case includes that stuff that's been promulgated for model years through 2016. It also includes the 35 mile per gallon requirement that's written into the Energy Independence and Security Act for model year 2020. But I've noted that it doesn't include the pending standards that are not yet final. We do include the fuel economy standards for medium and heavy-duty vehicles that were set by final rulemaking in September of 2011. So again, it's just a reminder of, I guess transportation accounts for about 70% of total liquid fuel demand in the United States, both in 2010 and 2035. So it really remains pretty flat, and it's clearly the big kahuna when it comes to liquid fuels demand. And this just shows you the composition of the transportation component of liquid fuels demand. And you can see that really highway vehicles, including both light and heavy-duty vehicles, account for over 80% of consumption, with light-duty vehicles alone accounting for over 60% of consumption. So yes, there's air, there's rail, there's marine, but it's really the light and heavy-duty highway vehicles that dominate. So this little table shows how increasing activity and increased vehicle efficiency work in opposite directions to determine the reference case projection for transportation fuel consumption. So starting with the second line under light-duty vehicles, we expect the number of licensed drivers to rise. We expect miles per licensed driver to rise. But again, the efficiency of the vehicle stock, we also expect to rise. And in effect, that increase in efficiency really leads to the top line, which is fuel consumption doesn't rise very much. And that's sort of a similar picture would apply to heavy-duty vehicles. But again, keep in mind that the light-duty vehicles does not reflect the proposed fuel economy standards for model years 2017 through 2025. So let's move on to the last section of this, electricity demand. This figure focuses on electricity demand, shows the rate of growth for electricity consumption continues to slide due to structural change, efficiency standards, and modest economic growth. And again, it's really amazing, just a change in my lifetime. When in the 50s, U.S. electricity demand was growing 10% a year, so you needed tremendous amounts of new capacity just to meet growing load. That slid dramatically over time. There are some other countries in the world that are still where the United States was in the 1950s. But at least for the U.S., it's been a pretty stark decline, and our latest outlook anticipates electricity consumption growth of about 0.8% per year on average between 2010 and 2035, resulting in about a 23% increase in electricity use over the period. Enough said about that. Again, this is just a point of reference kind of slide. This shows you what the U.S. electricity generation mix looks like as of 2010, and you can see that really together, coal is the biggest, natural gas and nuclear together really provide about 90% of generation. And there's a little blowout figure to show you the renewable part, what different renewables contribute there. So this figure is like many other figures you've seen already, so you should be used to them. Shows both the historical evolution of the generation mix since 1990 and our reference case projections to 2035. Looking at the slices from top to bottom, again, the natural gas share grows as new natural gas plants dominate new capacity additions, and natural gas prices keep them competitive with existing coal plants. The share of total generation from non-hydro renewables, which is included along with hydro in the renewables part of this figure, nearly triples. We're going to look at more detail of the non-hydro renewables next slide. Nearly triples between 2035. In absolute terms, the largest increases are in biomass and wind, with the increases in biomass coming mainly from co-firing in existing plants and as a co-product of liquid fuels production. In percentage terms, solar increases the most. Increases in coal generation are projected to slow, are expected to slow, as few new plants are added, and the 33, in fact, very little's added beyond, or almost nothing's added beyond what's already under construction, and 33 gigawatts of older and smaller plants are retired. Coal remains the dominant fuel for power generation, but again, its share falls, as I noted already, to 39% in 2035, and despite some new nuclear capacity, the share of nuclear in total generation declines from 20% to 18% between 2010 and 2035. So here, as promised, is a more detailed look at non-hydro renewable generation. Again, starting from top to bottom, biomass generation increases nearly fourfold, and that really reflects three separate components. There's a traditional industrial combined heat and power, and like pulp and paper, and some of the industries that have a lot of biomass that generates some electricity that they throw off. There's a power sector, which, in light of state renewable portfolio standards, we expect that biomass co-firing in existing coal plants will become more prevalent, so there'll be more biomass generation. And the top slice is advanced biofuels cogeneration. As cellulosic ethanol and some of the other advanced biofuels get going, those plants will also throw off excess electricity as a co-product. So wind generation nearly doubles, but the growth slows following the expiration of the production tax credit at the end of 2012, as provided by current law. Solar grows very rapidly, but it still accounts for a relatively small share of total electricity generation in 2035. And again, the 30% tax credit, and particularly the removal of the cap, of $2,000 on residential solar tax credits that was removed in 2008. The tax credit for residential goes away entirely in 2016 in the reference case, which reflects current law, and again, significant reduction in the tax credit for commercial. So a key downside uncertainty, there are upside uncertainties too, but a key downside uncertainty in the projection for non-hydro renewables is whether states will strictly enforce their renewable portfolio standard requirements, particularly if federal tax credits that make compliance with those requirements cheaper for consumers on their electric bill are not extended. Again, hard to know. For now, we've assumed that the state RPSs remain in effect unless we see evidence that a particular state is veering significantly off course. So, these are some, don't want to say much about this. I really want to shift to the Q&A and hear what you have to say. But I should note that the final reference case that we're going to put out this spring, along with all the other sensitivities that I've kind of hinted at, will vary somewhat from the early release results that we're discussing today. And some of the updates are listed on this slide. And with that, all that remains is to remind you of some of the many energy information products that are available from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and to thank you for your kind consideration of the work of our staff. But I'm going to stand behind it as well. And now I guess I'll turn it back over to our host from the School of Advanced International Studies to begin the dialogue. Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gruenspecht, very much for that very interesting and enlightening talk. And I'd like to open the floor up now for questions. If you would, please.
Hi, my name is Chris Albert from Swiss Embassy. I have two short questions. One question is, in your first slide, you referred to... Oh, of course, I'm sorry. Chris Albert from the Swiss Embassy. I have two short questions. In your first slide, you say that the projected growth of energy slows over the projection period, reflecting an extended economic recovery. My question is, the recovery, is that you're talking about a slower recovery, that's why it's slower, the energy rises
Well, in
slower.
part, yeah. I mean, economy is an important driver of energy.
Right.
I think the average U.S. GDP growth rate in this projection is about 2.6%. Staff should correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's right. Again, energy intensity is...
Go ahead.
Energy intensity is falling by about 2.1% per year. So the growth in energy is like about 0.5% per year.
Okay, thank you. And the other question was, you referred to regulatory drivers in the use of, in the decline of use of coal as a energy basis. Are you referring specifically to the mercury standards there, or a whole host of standards?
Well, if you look quickly, the mercury standards are actually not in this reference case because they were only finally promulgated. We do expect that there might be, and again, that's something we will address. That's one of the things we're going to update. You know, roughly speaking, we would imagine it would have another, I don't know, in the roughly 10 additional gigawatts of retirements, but not that large an effect on coal-fired generation, even with those additional retirements, because in part, and this is, I mean, to me it seems that modeling and, you know, modeling and intuition or modeling and analyst knowledge need to work together. But one thing we find when we start to look at the mercury and air toxic standard is that you do tend to drive down the cost of sulfur dioxide allowances. So the plants that remain in operation, actually their dispatch costs could be reduced a little bit, so they may run a little bit harder. So yes, there'd be more coal plant retirements, but probably not a very significant change in coal generation due to MATS. But that's something for the future. I mean, really, well, let me leave it there. I talk too much.
Right here.
Very much. I'm Margaret Ryan with AOL Energy. I wondered, you didn't mention Casper, the
friendly ghost?
The friendly ghost, the air rules that were just stayed at the very end of the year by the appeals court. Is an expected effect of those tighter sulfur and ozone standards worked into your estimates? And how is the stay going to affect that analysis?
Casper is in this early release reference case. I mean, keep in mind that, you know, our last year's reference case included CARE. So Casper and CARE they're a little different, but they're not that different. So really, again, there's always, you know, I mentioned in the presentation the 33 gigawatts of existing capacity retirement. Sometimes there's a desire to attach that just to regulations. In fact, it is affected by other factors. It's affected by the demand growth in electricity. It's affected by coal prices compared to natural gas prices, and it's certainly affected by the capital investment decisions that people might have to make to respond to environmental requirements. But it's really all of that taken, and it's affected by the state renewable portfolio standards. So it's affected by a lot of things, and sometimes there's a desire to simplify things and make one cause. And I'm not putting you in that category, but it's a variety of things. and the costs of environmental retrofits are certainly one of them.
Right here? Yes, please. Yes. Microphone, please. Right here. Thank you.
Well, my question is related to
Could you identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Donna Peterson, and essentially a volunteer in this area for a couple years. My question relates actually to the last slide, and which was on renewable sources. And you made the comment about this assumes that states that have standards in place or requirements for percentages that must come from renewable sources will hold. My question is, how many states actually have such a standard for renewable energy requirements in place?
I think it's in the neighborhood of 30. That may be off by a couple, but it's about 30. That's what I think is a good round number.
This gentleman here.
Hi, Howard. Bello Kusker, Advanced Resources. You introduced your section on natural gas by talking about uncertainties, particularly around the mighty Marcellus Shale. There's new information going to come out in the middle of February about the performance of that particular natural gas resources, and should that data show much higher well productivities and potentially larger resource, how would you incorporate that into your next round or your update to the outlook?
That's a good question. I mean, we've already, and frankly, I would say that one of the drivers of the current, again, I think sometimes too much can be made of the role of the total recoverable resource number as a driver of the kind of things that I think most people are actually interested in.
I was really focusing on well productivity.
I hear you.
And
well productivity is actually something, one of the reasons, I'm just got to get my engine warmed up here, make my disclaimers and get going. But one of the reasons that our sort of the estimate we're using now is different from the mean USGS number that was published last summer is exactly because we looked at well productivity information and just felt that that we would use the number that we used. So yes, we do look at well productivity information. I do think this will be an ongoing interesting discussion. I think that the time cycle of how often one updates will be interesting. I mean, USGS had for those of you who are getting sort of involved in a conversation that you're not familiar with, USGS had a Marcellus estimate of 2 trillion cubic feet that they had put out in 2002, and then they updated that to their 84 trillion cubic feet in 2011. So, they had been on sort of not revisiting these things, being a geologic survey. They operate closer to geologic time, and had not, I mean, it's perfectly good. I mean, they do excellent work. We rely heavily on them. We very much respect them, and we need to work and want to work with them. But it's also the case that we can't put out the January 23rd edition of the annual Outlook and then put out the January 24th edition and then the January 25th edition. So somewhere there has to be a way to reflect the information that now comes out of Pennsylvania every 6 months, and we try to do that. But I don't want to get. I don't think anyone is really well served by getting into I guess I would call a he said, or she said, he said, or whatever, he said, she said, kind of battle of resource estimates. So that's not what we're about, but we definitely, where we feel it's important and necessary, we're going to do the mission of the Energy Information Administration, and so we'll continue to do that. How's that for an answer?
Good enough.
Okay. It's back there.
Hello. Thank you. Kasia Klimasinska from Bloomberg News. Could you elaborate on the reasons for the significant increase in oil production in the U.S.? Is it primarily oil production? Is it primarily technological advances, or are there any policies that you could?
Well, I think it's really two things. It's really tight oil, what EIA used to call shale oil, because it comes out of the same type of formations as shale gas. But tight oil is certainly, I don't know how many of you are following the Bakken story, but certainly very rapid increases in production there. There's certainly other shale plays. In this edition of the Annual Energy Outlook, we actually consider 8 different shale oil plays, 4 more than in the last edition. And so that's a big piece. The offshore Gulf of Mexico is another big piece. So I'd say those are the two really, over the next decade, those are pretty important drivers. Prices are high. You know, people want to drill.
At the back, right there.
Hi, Aisha Roscoe with Reuters. I know one of the gray areas that you mentioned was pipeline infrastructure, and I was just wondering, when it comes to like the advances with tight oil and what have you, like what impact does say a rejection of a major pipeline like the Keystone XL have, and does your report kind of look at there could be opposition to other pipelines to move some of that oil out of North Dakota and other places? So what impact does that have?
Well, given the short answer is that not very much in these type of projections. And the reason is, given the oil prices that we have in our reference case, the production in those areas is not sort of economically marginal. It's economically very attractive. So would producers and others clearly like to move that oil, you know, through pipelines? Sure they would. But the oil, at least given the prices in the reference case, certainly find a way to markets, either U.S. markets or other markets, through some other, you know, other means if necessary, other pipelines if necessary. There are lots of pipelines that don't require federal, you know, really this cross-border approval thing. There's a lot of pipeline capacity there already. I think we're already seeing some of these other adjustments in the sense that we're seeing a lot more movement of crude by rail recently. We've seen some plans to reverse existing pipelines to sort of get oil out of the mid-continent to the refining centers. So, I mean, these are important issues, whatever pipeline, the current one that's under discussion and the other ones. But kind of view is that, you know, we don't model specific pipelines in the AEO. And again, given the prices, we don't think that the production is really dependent on the presence or absence of any particular pipeline.
Over here.
Romaric Roignan of the French Embassy. Your figures show that there is likely to be an increase in gas production by roughly, I would say, 20% by 2035. And at the same time, the part of natural gas in electricity generation only increases by 3 points. So what is the market for this new gas production? Would it be petrochemicals or vehicles, or if it's not completely electricity generation?
It's 3 percentage points, but remember that of share, but remember that the total amount of electricity generation is rising by about 23%. So it's a share of a larger market. That's one aspect. Electricity is the biggest domestic market, biggest growth in domestic electricity consumption. Domestic natural gas consumption in our projection. Again, we do have some increased use in industry and commercial as well, but electricity is the biggest place for increased domestic use of natural gas. We do, in this projection, as I showed, do become a net exporter. So one of the things that happens is we import less and we export more. So part of the increased production is absorbed by shifting away from being a net importer to being a net exporter.
Okay, I think we'll take two more questions.
Howard, we promised the EIA Twitter followers one question at least here. We have Josh Hickman asking a question you touched on briefly on your presentation. He asks, how are soft natural gas prices and strong oil prices going to affect shale production across the country?
I think the short answer to that, and we certainly see it, is that drillers are headed to the wet, so-called the wet areas, the areas where you can get either a lot of natural gas liquids, like propane and ethane, which have prices that track more closely to oil prices than natural gas prices, or even better than that, areas that have crude oil in the shale. So we're seeing places like certain parts of the Marcellus, the wetter parts. We're seeing the Eagle Ford shale, particularly the northern part of the Eagle Ford shale, which is wetter. And that's what we're going to see. We're going to see drillers targeting the gas where they can get, the areas where they can get these higher value hydrocarbons along with natural gas. One thing to keep in mind, there are really three different returns to gas drilling. There's obviously the dry natural gas. There's the value of the liquids that you can produce with the gas. And there's also knowledge. A lot of the world is very interested in this technology for shale production. And there have been a lot of sort of, people who follow the press know that there are a lot of buy-ins into shale gas producers by foreign companies and and other companies. It doesn't have to be foreign. And in many cases, part of the deal involves the partner sharing a substantial portion of the costs of additional incremental drilling, because they're going to gain knowledge about the technology through actually engaging in drilling. So there's really three co-products. There's gas, there's liquids, and there's knowledge that are driving the drilling business. And the question is how long that can continue to go on and how low prices can get before you start to see a cessation or a cooling off of drilling.
Okay, over here.
Thank you very much. I'm Ling Zhou with Constellation Energy. My question is also about natural gas. I have two parts. One is more long-term. The other one is more short-term. Both about the balance of natural gas. On slide 11, you have the projection shows that U.S. is going to become a net exporter by 2020. So what are the forms of exports that you expect to take place? Is the majority going to be LNG export or increased pipeline export to Mexico?
I think increased pipeline exports to Mexico remain the biggest sort of part of our natural gas exports. For those who don't know, we already do export significant.
Re-export.
We export, not re-export.
Oh, right.
We export significant amounts of natural gas via pipeline to Mexico. We also re-export some of the liquefied natural gas that we currently import, although our imports of liquefied natural gas are falling very dramatically. We do expect to be, or in this projection, I should say what we expect. In this projection, we do export some liquefied natural gas that comes from domestic production. We only, though, have a pretty small amount of that going on. Now, there is consideration by the Department of Energy of several requests for licenses to export liquefied natural gas produced from domestic natural gas. That's a different part of the Department of Energy that handles those requests. We've certainly, at their request, done some analysis that's going to feed in to some further analysis that they will do. again, there are a lot of different possibilities, but in our scenario, we have a small amount, or a modest amount, I don't know, it's one man small or woman small is another person's large. We have some liquefied natural gas exports from U.S. produced natural gas, but it's really only sort of one plant's worth, basically. You know, there are many other applications that have been put in. One thing to note is because an application has been put in doesn't mean that, A, the plant will be built, because we know from a time when we were frantically looking at, or not we, but when others were frantically looking at applications for LNG receiving terminals, they didn't all get built. And the other thing is, even if they do get built, it's not clear what their capacity or capacity factor would actually be. That would depend on the future market. So, okay, one more.
Thank you. Sorry, I have another part of my question.
I want to be fair to, I mean, I'm glad to talk with you after, but given the time constraint, let's be fair to, I guess, Will or Howard or whatever. I don't know who.
Okay, we'll take one and then the other, and then that's
okay.
That's it. So if you want to go first, please.
The SAIS question.
Will Cole from SAIS. Relating to your nuclear power projection, where you have the percentage dropping a little, but I assume that probably in absolute numbers that's a small rise. Can you say anything about how that breaks down? You're projecting a small amount of nuclear construction? Is that mainly in deregulated states or regulated states?
I think there's some nuclear construction. You know, we're starting to have a picture of what is sort of on the horizon, you know, at least in the near term to get built. So we have the two Georgia plant. We have Sumner. We have Vogtle. I think we have Watts, Barr, the one that's already, you know, the one that they restarted construction on. That's going to be finished soon. I think we have Bellefonte, which TVA has talked about starting. The issue is right now, you know, a lot of these plants, I mean, they get production tax credits if they come on by 2021, or up to a certain amount gets production tax credits. They also have gotten some loan guarantees. Really, the loan guarantees and the production tax credits are pretty important to the economics of these early plants. Production tax credits, you know, become less of a factor under current law beyond this first group of plants. You know, we also have uprates at existing plants. That's pretty important. You know, you can get more power by upgrading the turbines and stuff. So it's a combination of a few new plants being built, some uprates of existing plants. Toward the very, very end of the period, we have some new construction beginning that doesn't, or coming on that doesn't get production tax credits. But it's a hard environment for nuclear because, you know, natural gas prices are pretty low in this environment, and it's hard economically, I think. We also have some retirements starting after 2030. So it's a combination of some new plant builds, actually mostly in the front end of the period, some uprates offset by some retirements at the end of the projection.
Okay. Last question.
Hi, Matt Bandick, reporter with SNL Energy. I was curious if you saw any interesting changes compared to the 2011 outlook regarding the forecast about the electricity mix.
Well, we do have more retirements of existing coal plants. Again, I would not attribute that solely to environmental regulation. It's really the combination of, you know, demand growth and state RPSs and coal prices, which are higher in this outlook, and natural gas prices, which are lower in this outlook. It's certainly, especially at the beginning. So that's one big change. I think that's the biggest change.
Okay. I'd like to thank Dr. Gruenspecht once again. It was interesting and informative talk, and thank you all for coming down and participating. Thanks.
Thank you.